Hello, this is Edith Neumeyer, and I am the author of the book, The Mystery of Adam. I want to talk again about Matthew 24 today and kind of make a summary. I have done several videos on specifically Luke 21, which parallel Matthew 24, and I believe I also did one with Mark 13. These three gospel parallel, of course, Matthew 24, and they describe the same event. Now, each one of these, Matthew was a disciple, was an apostle. Luke was a disciple of Paul. And Mark, of course, was a young boy during Jesus's time. So he most likely knew Jesus personally and may have experienced some of what he described. So he had it most likely from Peter. So, but all three describe the same event. Now, what is this event describing? Again, Matthew is chapter 24, and Luke, it's in in chapter 21, and who else is it? Mark is in chapter 13. So what does all three events start with? All three events start with the story about Jesus leaving the temple and the disciples looking at the temple and just marveling over how pretty that temple is, how beautiful. And Jesus told them, all three events, that nothing will be left of the temple, nothing whatsoever. And so a little later, when they were sitting on Mount Olive, I believe, let me see if I can see that in Matthew 24, Mount Olive. They were sitting on Mount Olive. And Jesus, or the disciples asked Jesus, when will this happen? And they added in Matthew, supposedly also said, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of age? Now, Luke and Mark did not say that. They just focused on the destruction of the temple. But Matthew, for some reason, added this, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of age? Well, that's because I believe Matthew connected the two. Now, we know today that Jesus' second coming and the destruction of the temple is not the same thing. Now, so many therefore believe that this destruction of the temple is talking about the third temple. But that is not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus clearly is talking about the destruction of the second temple that was still standing when he was alive. He was not talking about a third temple. No place. Jesus is talking about the destruction of the second temple. Okay, that's all. And then he is kind of pulling the whole thing all the way to the end. Okay, all the way to the end. But he focuses, especially in Luke and Mark, he is focusing on the destruction of the temple. Most of the chapter. And then he comes to the end and says, when these tribulations are fulfilled, or when the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, then the end is near. And the end sparks off with the darkening of the sun and the moon becoming blood red. That is the kick-off time for Jesus' return. And so today I want to look again at Matthew, because so many people are still very, very, very confused. It's just amazing why so many people are confused about Matthew. Of course, false teachers always use Matthew 24 because it is a difficult chapter to read, because Matthew 24 is not chronological. Okay, it's written almost like Revelation there, or even Daniel. Okay, so you may read a whole section of chronological events, but then it jumps back, and the reader has to understand when things are kind of jumping back and are describing again the same event just from a different angle. And Matthew is very typical for that. And so people get very confused, and I believe, of course, Satan knows it, and the false teachers know it. They know that people will get confused. Okay? So many times Matthew 24 is used to prove some kind of tribulation time, to prove that the third temple has to stand. Jesus does not talk about a third temple. He never said that this temple will be destroyed, but it will be rebuilt again. Never did he say that. Okay? Now, read Matthew 24 with an open eye. Okay? Please stay open, because people can definitely confuse you heavily, and it happens all the time. Okay? Very often. So, Matthew 24 is over a time span of 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years. Okay? Just keep that in mind. But the whole 2,000 years are not described. Jesus describes in big detail the destruction of Jerusalem. He describes in big detail what will happen before the destruction of the temple or Jerusalem. And then he has a very small section. It almost jumps, and I'm not going to say there's a gap, because so many people say, oh, there's a gap. There is just, it's not explained, okay? You will see it when we read it. You will see it, okay? But let's read Matthew 24. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Okay, so that's what I was saying. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Okay, so it will be utterly destroyed. That's what we have today. The temple is still utterly destroyed. So then Jesus was sitting on Mount Olives. The disciples came to him privately and asked him, tell us. They said, when will this happen? Okay, when will this happen? What are they talking about? They're talking about the destruction of the temple. Don't forget that. And what will be the sign of your coming? So there's two things they want to know. Okay, two things. The destruction of the temple and the sign of his coming. Okay, so keep that in mind, because that is what now Matthew is describing. and the end of the age. And when they talk about the end of the age, they're talking about the end of the Gentiles, which we'll see later. Okay, that's the end of the age. That's when the 1,000-year reign starts. Okay, the millennium. The end of the age will be here. Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you. He is now describing what? What will happen before the destruction of the temple. He starts the signs of the destruction. What are the signs? What signs do we see before the temple is destroyed? So you can read it. Tell us, they said. Or Jesus said, watch out that no one deceives you. Okay? Please do not be deceived. Jesus is telling you, don't be deceived. Okay? For many will come in my name, claiming I am Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. What is he talking about? He's still talking about the time before the destruction of the temple. Okay? There will be wars and rumor of wars. Make no mistake, this is not about today. This is not about his second coming at this point. This is talking about the destruction of the temple. When will be the destruction of the temple? Okay? Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. What is it talking about? Birth pains of what? The destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted. Who is he talking to? He's talking about the disciples. Okay, the believers right then and there, disciples. They will be persecuted and handed over to authorities. Okay. At the time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. That's all about that time, because the increase of wickedness. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Okay. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Now here he is jumping. Okay, it's almost like a jump. He's talking about the destruction of the temple. What will be the signs? Now he is saying, but this hard time, this tribulation that they're going through, will continue to the end, and the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Okay? So here we are at the end, and we will not see what the end is until, I believe, verse 29 or 30. Okay? So he stops right there, because now Matthew is doing something very interesting, which, like I said, also John did, and Daniel did. Now he jumps back, because we're at the end now. We're at the time when Jesus returns, okay, with this verse. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Okay, that's what he's talking about. So we are at the end already. Now we are going to jump back. What is it about? This is about the destruction of this second temple, not the third. He didn't talk about anything. In this first section, he didn't talk about the destruction of a third temple or the building of a third temple. He talks about the destruction of the second temple. So now let's go to 15. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Is he talking about the third temple? No. He is going back in time and re-describes now in more detail the destruction of the temple and the signs, okay, and what they're supposed to be watching for. He's saying, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, and desolation is really the major thing you need to focus on. Abomination that causes desolation. What is an abomination that causes desolation? What happened during the destruction of the second temple that was an abomination that causes desolation? Well, that was number one, a fire, because the Jews fought against the Romans, and because of this fighting, the temple caught on fire. Okay, the Romans tried to put it out, not even the Jews. The Jews went up and ransacked the temple, but the Romans tried to put it out, but they couldn't. And the Jews continued to war, and that is why the temple got destroyed. So it was an abomination. Nobody should burn a temple, right? That would be an abomination. But it is an abomination that causes desolation. Desolation means destruction. Okay? So there was an abomination that caused the destruction of the temple. And here Jesus is saying this is according to the prophet of Daniel. Okay? The 70 years that were determined for the Jewish people are now coming to an end. Okay? And Daniel said that there will be an abomination that causes desolation. No Antichrist is sitting in the temple. Okay? It is an abomination that causes desolation, destruction. Okay? That's all it is. But let's continue. But if you want to do some more studies on Daniel 70 weeks, look up some of my videos, because I describe that very clearly, that is fulfilled. There is no description that there's going to be the destruction of a second temple and then a new temple will be built. No, it is the second temple that was rebuilt during those 70 years of Daniel, and it is that temple that was destroyed. And that's what Daniel was talking about. And that's what Jesus is talking about again in Matthew 24. He's talking about the second temple. Okay? Please read it again. Okay? Then in verse 16, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Why is he saying that? Because of the destruction. Because the Romans were killing everybody. And if you see that, there's abomination in the temple, the burning, then run to the hills. Because if you don't, you will be killed. The blood was flowing in Jerusalem when the temple was destroyed. Okay, finally destroyed. Okay, so, and most of the Christians that experienced that when Jesus actually was saying that, they were still alive during that time. And they knew the prophecy of Matthew and Mark and Luke, and they flew to the mountains or even to other places. We know that. So they didn't get killed. It says, let no one on the housetop go down and take anything out of the house. So it's very important. Continue reading, because it tells you that it's how dreadful it would be for those who are pregnant. And it says then, for then there will be great distress or tribulation unequal from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equal again. This is talking about the distress that the Jews went through during that destruction of the temple. Okay? Not just the temple in Jerusalem, but the Jews continued the war against the Romans, and the Romans just totally almost killed all the Jews in Judea. within the next 50 years. Not very many survived, unless you left Judea when it was time. You did not survive it. Okay, you did not. Most people did not. This is not talking about this tribulation time, okay, that so many people misinterpret. This was actual time that happened, okay? And then it says, so if anybody tells you that he's in the wilderness, don't go. And for as lightning comes from the east, is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man be. So don't be deceived. Okay, so here he is now again moving really, really fast from the destruction of the temple to the end. And the disciples didn't know. It took 2,000 years for that to happen. We're now living in this time where this actually could come to an end. Because 28, we're hearing, wherever there is a carcass, there is vultures. Their vultures will gather. And then 29, immediately after the distress of those days. Okay, so immediately after the distress of those days. He's talking about distress that the disciples went through, okay, the apostles, during the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. He is talking about the distress the martyrs went through. He's talking about the distress that all the believers went through during the Inquisition, the Roman Catholic time before the Reformation. And he's talking about the distress that all saints are going through right now. Until when? Until the distress of those days are over. The tribulation of those days. What are those days? The days that started with or before the destruction of the temple. Okay, that's what people don't understand, and they need to get that in their head. So what is the end? Now we're coming to the end. The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. Okay, and you know that, probably read it. Tells you all the crazy things that will happen. We also read that in Revelation 6 at the end of the chapter. Okay, the sixth seal. You will see the same thing again. You will see the same thing in Luke 21 and in Mark 13. This will be the end and the beginning of the next age, of the day of the Lord. Then it says, then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the people of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angel with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. And I believe again that this is not chronological. If you look 30 and 31, I believe that is not necessarily chronological. Okay, he will gather the people. He will appear. The Son of the Man will appear. That is talking about his second coming. People will mourn. But then in 31 he goes, and he will send his angel with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from the end of the earth. I believe that is actually the rapture. But the rapture will happen before people will see the Son of Man in heaven. It is happen almost close. If you consider 2,000 years, it's pretty close. Okay, when the rapture happens and the Son of Man appears. Here it says, now learn the lesson from the fig tree. As soon as the figs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that the summer is near. So he's now going back again and telling you again what kinds to look for, what kinds of things. And then in 36 he says, but about that day or hour, no one knows, That is a saying of what? Of the Feast of Trumpets. But of those, that day and hour, no one knows. That is symbolic for the Feast of Trumpets. Not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. The Father will let the Son know when the rooms are finished. Okay? When the rooms are finished. And only the Father makes that determination when the bridegroom comes back for his bride. Okay? Nobody knows, not even the Son, because that's something the Father determines. So this has everything to do with the Feast of Trumpets, which we are celebrating actually today. I have to say that too. I know I made a video about the Feast of Trumpets, and hoping that maybe this year will be the day for the rapture, but maybe not this year. But it's not over yet. So the last trump, here he's talking about the trump again, right? So and then he is going say, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Of course, that is all about the end times now, right? For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. Now, I believe that Noah told them. Noah preached, okay, but they didn't believe it. All right, they said, "Oh, rain, stupid. That's not going to happen." And people today say, "Hey, be prepared. We have the Feast of Trumpets. Be prepared. The Lord is coming. One of these years he's coming, and it's so close." People are saying he's coming, and we don't even have the 7-year tribulation time yet, or the 3.5 years. Some people believe 3.5 years. But no, it is almost 2,000 years of tribulation that the saints have been going through. Look at the multitude in Revelation 7. The multitude came out of great tribulation. Who is this multitude? The multitudes are all believers that were raptured. Okay? So all believers came through great tribulation. Not just a couple, not just the saints that went through the 3.5 years. Okay? All of the saints, all the way to the end. And he says it right here, as you read it in 29, immediately after the distress of those days. Okay, some say, I think the King James says, after the tribulation of those days. Okay, what is those days? What is he talking about those days? He's talking about the 2,000 years. Okay, nothing else. He's talking about from the time Matthew 24 starts. Okay, that's what he's talking about. So, okay, so during Noah's time, people were just drinking. They didn't care. They were doing well, and Noah had to build his ark by himself. Okay, so it will be when Jesus is coming again. People will say, "Hey, wait a minute, be ready." They ain't gonna listen. And it says 2 men will be, here you see the rapture. Okay, the next 40, verse 40. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a hand mill, one will be taken and the other left. Now, you see that this is going to happen really, I believe, during the time when, or maybe even before, the sun will be darkened. Okay, during this time, I believe that, I shouldn't say I believe, but that's what the Bible says, that we are not destined for the wrath. So this rapture will happen before the wrath. And the sun will be darkened is the wrath of God. No doubt. Okay, that will be the wrath. because we see that also in Revelation 6. Read the whole thing. People know the wrath is coming. And the people then in chapter 7, the crowd, the multitude, are the raptured saints. And here you can see clearly 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, one will be left. 2 women will be grinding with a hand mill, and one will be taken, one will be left. That is the rapture. Okay, so that is the rapture that will happen, I believe, before the wrath. Okay, so you can see this is not necessarily chronological. Matthew keeps going back and rehashing things. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him going when he returns. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that a servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time, and he then begins to beat his fellow servants, and to beat and drink with drunkenness, and to eat and drink with drunkenness. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So this is a warning. It's a warning for us to be ready. I'm going to come to an end today, and I hope today on the Feast of Trumpets, I hope you are ready. Do not be one of these foolish virgins that have no lamp in the oil. Okay, that is very important. Read again the parable of the 10 virgins. 10 virgins, 5 were foolish, did not make it in the chambers in the New Jerusalem that Jesus right now is preparing. Be ready. Do not let yourselves be deceived. Read the Bible for yourself. Don't say, ask. Well, I'm sure you want to ask questions if you're not sure, but read it and let the Holy Spirit always guide you, because the Holy Spirit will tell you. He will open your eyes. I was at the point where I looked at Matthew, and boy, it was confusing because I listened to the false teachers. I had a Scofield Bible that totally messed me up, and I finally, had to learn all these things on my own and read them, with open eyes. And I just hope that you will do that. Open eyes, open eyes. We don't have very much time. Our time is up. We are living in the time of Noah. Okay? Jesus can come, any year, let's put it that way, any year, on the Feast of Trumpets, any year. It could be this year, because the Feast of Trumpets are not over yet. Okay? Could be this year. Don't know. But be ready. The time is so close. I will come to an end. Please let the Holy Spirit guide you.